The crimson war moon of Velthar cast its bloody light across the assembled Dominion fleet. 30,000 vessels strong, their hulls gleaming with fresh battle scars from conquered worlds. Admiral Crixton adjusted his ceremonial war claws. As he surveyed the tactical display, each dot representing another species crushed beneath the Veltharian boot. "Pathetic," he growled, his triple-jointed fingers tracing the orbital patterns of the latest target system. "These humans don't even qualify as a proper conquest. Single-star system, primitive fusion drives, barely past their atomic age." His tactical officer, Mordak, clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Intelligence suggests they've only achieved interplanetary flight within their own system, Excellency. No defensive satellites, no military stations beyond their homeworld's orbit. The integration should take less than a rotation." For 3 millennia, the Veltharian Dominion had perfected the art of warfare. Their military doctrine was studied across 17 galactic sectors, their battle-tested strategies carved into monuments of crystallized bone. They had conquered the crystal-singing Harmon, shattered the living metal fleets of the Ixtar Collective, and turned the proud warrior poets of Zenkara into cattle. Each species had brought their own martial traditions, their unique approaches to combat, only to be systematically dismantled by Veltharian superiority. The humans appeared to be no different. Their crude chemical rockets puttered about their yellow star's gravity well like insects, their largest vessels barely qualifying as corvettes by Dominion standards. Orbital reconnaissance revealed a species fond of pointing primitive projectile weapons at each other, their warfare consisting of hurling metal slugs and explosive chemicals with laughable inefficiency. "Deploy the standard integration protocol," Crixton commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 victories. "Third Fleet will establish orbital dominance. Ground Command will secure population centers, and Processing Division will begin cataloging useful specimens. I estimate complete pacification within 48 standard hours." The bridge crew responded with practiced efficiency, their movements a ballet of conquest refined over countless campaigns. Warning broadcasts were prepared in the human languages, crude guttural sounds that barely qualified as communication. Surrender terms were standardized: immediate cessation of all military activity, transfer of governmental authority to Dominion, administrators, and voluntary reporting to processing centers for species evaluation. It was, Crixton reflected, almost boring in its predictability. The humans would resist initially, of course. They always did. Some primitive instinct would drive them to fire their pathetic weapons, perhaps ram a few suicide craft into Dominion shields. Then would come the inevitable recognition of futility, the desperate transmission of surrender offers, the final collapse into submission. Within a standard year, human military doctrine would be just another entry in the Dominion's vast archives of conquered warfare techniques. Their strategies would be dissected, their weapons reverse-engineered, their warriors either broken or recruited into Dominion service. The useful specimens would be integrated into the labor force, while the remainder would be processed for biomass or relegated to entertainment purposes. As Third Fleet began its approach vector toward the Sol system, Crixton allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Veltharian Dominion had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, the complete mastery of warfare itself. Every conceivable approach to combat had been encountered, analyzed, and overcome. From the hive-mind swarms of the cluster, worlds to the reality-bending technologies of the ethereal consortium, nothing had proven capable of challenging Dominion supremacy. The humans would simply be the latest confirmation of an absolute truth. The Veltharian way of war was inevitable, unstoppable, and eternal. None of them suspected they were about to encounter something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about the nature of conflict itself. The transmission came through on all frequencies simultaneously, its signal somehow bypassing every encryption protocol the Dominion had developed over 3,000 years of electronic warfare. What made it truly unsettling wasn't the impossibility of the hack. It was the casual politeness of the message. Greetings, visitors. This is Orbital Defense Coordinator Vex Aria of the Sol Defense Consortium. We've noticed your rather impressive fleet gathering at our system's edge. Before proceeding further, perhaps we could have a chat? We'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings. Admiral Crixtan stared at the communication array, his war claws unconsciously extending. The voice spoke perfect Veltharian high command, dialect with inflections that suggested not just fluency, but deep cultural understanding. More disturbing still, their sensors showed no signs of any transmission source. The signal appeared to originate from empty space itself. "How many defensive installations do our scans detect?" he asked his sensor officer. "None, Excellency. The system remains exactly as our initial reconnaissance indicated. Primitive, undefended, with only basic orbital infrastructure around their homeworld." Mordak's mandibles clicked nervously. "Perhaps they've developed some form of stealth technology? The signal penetration suggests—" "Impossible," Crixtan cut him off. "We've encountered every form of cloaking device in the known galaxy. Our sensors would detect the gravitational distortion of any significant defensive installation." The transmission continued with the same infuriating politeness. "We understand you've had considerable success with your integration protocols across this sector. Quite impressive, really. The systematic dismantling of the Harmon crystalline matrices was particularly elegant. However, we feel compelled to point out that your current approach may not yield the results you're accustomed to." A chill ran down Crixtan's spinal plates. The voice was referencing classified military operations, battles fought in star systems light years away. Information that should have been impossible for any species in this backwater system to possess. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving another transmission on a secured channel. It's coming from inside our own ship." The voice now emanated from the bridge speakers with crystal clarity, as if the speaker were standing among them. "I do apologize for the intrusion, but your communication protocols are rather quaint. We've taken the liberty of establishing a more direct connection." Crixtan's hand moved to his sidearm, though he realized the futility of the gesture. "Identify yourself. What species are you? What is your homeworld's defensive capability?" Oh, sound that might have been laughter echoed through the bridge. "Oh, Admiral Crixtan, yes, we know who you are. We're human, entirely, completely human. As for our defensive capabilities—" The voice paused, and suddenly every screen on the bridge displayed an impossible image. The Third Fleet, all 30,000 vessels, surrounded by structures that simply hadn't been there moments before. Massive installations that dwarfed even the largest Dominion dreadnoughts, their surfaces flowing with patterns that hurt to look at directly. The formations defied every principle of physics the Veltharians understood. Some appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Others seemed to bend space around them like liquid. "We built these while you were talking," the voice continued conversationally. "Well, built isn't quite the right word. Humans have always been rather creative with our definitions of possibility." Mordak's voice cracked as he read his instruments. "Admiral, the energy readings, they're off the scale. These structures are generating power equivalent to our entire fleet, multiplied by several orders of magnitude. Now then," Vexaria continued, "we really would prefer to handle this diplomatically. You see, we've been studying your species for quite some time. Your military doctrines are fascinating, but they're based on certain assumptions about the nature of warfare that we've found limiting. The impossible structures began to move with fluid grace, repositioning themselves around the Dominion fleet in formations that suggested not just superior technology, but an entirely different understanding of space, time, and causality itself. We're going to make you an offer, Admiral, one that we hope you'll consider carefully." "Your offer is irrelevant," Admiral Crixtan snarled, his pride overriding the ice-cold fear crawling up his spine. "The Veltharian Dominion has never retreated. Never negotiated from a position of weakness. If you wish to demonstrate your defensive capabilities, then face our full might. The silence that followed stretched for exactly 13 seconds. Long enough for Crixtan to wonder if he'd made a catastrophic error, not long enough for him to retract the challenge. "Very well," Vexaria replied, and her tone carried something that made seasoned warriors across 30,000 warships suddenly remember what terror felt like. "We were hoping to avoid this, but humans have always learned best through direct experience." Crixtan's tactical officer began reading fleet status reports, his voice growing increasingly strained. "Third Battle Group reports all weapon systems inoperative. 5th Squadron's engines are somehow running in reverse. Dreadnought Bonecrusher is rotating along its vertical axis and cannot compensate." The Admiral watched his tactical display with growing horror as ship after ship reported identical problems. Weapons that had carved through the hulls of 100 conquered species now refused to discharge. Engines that had propelled his fleet across galactic distances now pushed their vessels in random directions. Navigation systems displayed readings that suggested they were simultaneously occupying multiple positions in space. "This is impossible," Mordak whispered, his mandibles chattering. "Our systems are quantum encrypted, hardened against every known form of electronic warfare." "Admiral," came Vexaria's voice, now somehow speaking directly inside each crew member's head, "what you're experiencing isn't electronic warfare. We've simply adjusted the local parameters of reality. Your weapons still function perfectly. They're just following different physical laws now. Laws that we happen to find more convenient." On the main display, one of the impossible human structures began to demonstrate. It wasn't an attack, exactly, more like a casual gesture of incomprehensible capability. Space itself seemed to fold, and suddenly half the Third Fleet found itself occupying the exact same coordinates without any collision occurring. The ships existed in the same location while somehow remaining distinct, their crews able to see each other through what should have been solid bulkheads. "Your military doctrine," Vexaria continued, "assumes that warfare operates within fixed parameters of physics, technology, and causality. You've mastered conflict within those boundaries so thoroughly that you've forgotten they were boundaries at all. A Dominion destroyer attempted to ram one of the human installations, its captain's warrior code demanding action even in the face of the incomprehensible. The vessel passed harmlessly through the structure, emerging on the other side with its hull somehow turned inside out, yet still completely functional, its crew unharmed but now breathing vacuum as if it were atmosphere. We appreciate the traditional approach, the human coordinator said, but humans stopped thinking of warfare as a contest between existing forces centuries ago. For us, conflict is simply another engineering problem. When faced with an enemy, we don't just adapt our tactics, we modify the fundamental nature of combat itself. Crixtan found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a croak. What are you? We're still human, Admiral. We've simply chosen to interpret the concept more flexibly than most species. You see, when humanity first encountered the broader galaxy, we realized something important. Every other species had developed their own unique approach to warfare, their own specialized advantages. The logical conclusion was obvious. The impossible structures began to demonstrate different principles of impossible physics with each passing moment. Matter converted to energy and back again in patterns that spelled out mathematical equations in languages that hadn't been invented yet. Gravity flowed upward in spirals that somehow pulled downward simultaneously. We decided to master them all. Every form of warfare, every military doctrine, every strategic advantage that any species has ever possessed. Then we went further and developed approaches to conflict that no one had ever imagined. Admiral Crixtan's proud fleet hung motionless, in space, caught in a demonstration of power so casual it bordered on insulting. His weapons were inoperative, his ships were occupying impossible geometries, and his crew was beginning to understand that they weren't facing a superior enemy, They were facing something that had transcended the very concept of warfare itself. "Now, then," Vexaria said, her tone returning to its earlier politeness, "shall we discuss that offer we mentioned? You have 30 seconds to explain your proposal before I order the activation of our quantum breach warheads," Admiral Crixtan managed, though even he recognized the emptiness of the threat. His weapons had been rendered inoperative in ways that violated his understanding of reality itself. "Admiral," Vexaria's voice carried what sounded like genuine sympathy, "those warheads rely on the principle that space-time maintains consistent properties. We've temporarily suspended that assumption in this region of space, but we appreciate the gesture. It shows you're still thinking tactically." The human coordinator paused, and suddenly the impossible structures surrounding the Dominion fleet began to simplify. Not retreat, but somehow fold themselves down into configurations that were merely incomprehensible rather than reality-defying. The Veltharian ships found themselves able to maneuver again, though their weapons remained stubbornly non-functional. "Here's what we're proposing," Vexaria continued. "The Veltharian Dominion has spent 3 millennia perfecting warfare as you understand it. You've conquered hundreds of species, absorbed their military doctrines, and become the undisputed masters of conventional conflict. That's genuinely impressive." On the main display, images began appearing. Battles the Dominion had fought across the galaxy, strategies they'd employed, victories they'd achieved. But the perspective was wrong, as if viewed from impossible angles or through instruments that could perceive 11 dimensions simultaneously. However, you've reached the limitations of that approach. Every species you've encountered operates within the same basic assumptions about the nature of conflict: physical forces, technological advantages, numerical superiority, tactical positioning, all variations on the same fundamental theme. Mordak leaned closer to his instruments, his voice barely audible. "Admiral, these readings, they're showing us battles we haven't fought yet, conflicts with species we haven't encountered. Humanity took a different approach," Vexaria explained. "When we discovered we weren't alone in the galaxy, we realized that traditional warfare was just one possible interpretation of conflict. So we asked ourselves, what if warfare itself could be optimized?" The images on the screen shifted, showing human colonies scattered across dozens of star systems, colonies that, according to Dominion intelligence, shouldn't exist. The humans were supposedly confined to their single system, barely capable of interplanetary travel. "We've been watching galactic civilizations for quite some time, Admiral. Learning from them, yes, but also protecting them. Every species the Dominion has conquered over the past millennium, we were there, observing, recording occasionally, intervening when necessary." Crixtan felt something cold settle in his chest cavity. Impossible. Our conquests were complete. We cataloged every survivor, processed every population. You cataloged what we allowed you to catalog: the most valuable members of each species, their greatest minds, their most innovative thinkers, their most creative artists. They were relocated before your integration protocols began. Relocated to human space, where they could continue developing their unique approaches to existence. The tactical display suddenly expanded, showing not just the Sol system, but dozens of neighboring star systems. What had appeared to be empty, space or uninhabitable worlds now revealed themselves to be teeming with activity. Massive installations that defied detection, entire civilizations operating under principles of physics that made Dominion technology look primitive. "Every species you conquered brought something unique to warfare," Vexaria continued. "The Harmon understood conflict as crystalline resonance patterns. The Ixtar approached battle as living metal sculptures in motion. The Zenkara treated warfare as performance art that could reshape reality through pure aesthetic achievement. The impossible structures around the Dominion fleet began to demonstrate each concept in turn, crystalline formations singing mathematical, Equations that caused nearby asteroids to reshape themselves, liquid metal constructs dancing through space in patterns that opened temporary wormholes, artistic installations so beautiful they caused hardened warriors to weep while simultaneously calculating optimal firing solutions. We didn't just preserve these species, Admiral. We synthesized their approaches to conflict into something entirely new. What you're witnessing isn't superior technology. It's warfare reimagined as applied philosophy. Crixtan's claws scraped against his command chair's armrests. What do you want from us? We want to offer the Veltharian Dominion the opportunity to evolve beyond your current limitations. Your mastery of conventional warfare is unparalleled, but you've reached the boundaries of that paradigm. Join us, and we'll show you forms of conflict that make your greatest victories look like children playing with toys. The human coordinator's next words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Or continue your current approach and discover that even your greatest strengths become irrelevant when the nature of warfare itself has been fundamentally reimagined. Admiral Crixton's bridge fell silent, except for the soft clicking of cooling metal and the barely audible whisper of life support systems. Around them, the impossible human constructs waited with the patience of entities that existed outside conventional time, their surfaces shifting through configurations that suggested vast computational processes beyond Dominion comprehension. You speak of evolution, Crixtan said finally, his voice carrying 3 millennia of military tradition. The Veltharian Dominion has evolved through conquest, through the absorption of defeated enemies' strengths. We are what we are, because we have never surrendered, never compromised, never accepted anything less than total victory. And that, Vexaria replied, is precisely why we need you. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, incomprehensible, yet somehow inevitable. Mordak's mandibles clicked nervously as he processed sensor readings that made increasingly little sense. Human installations that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, energy patterns that flowed backward through time, defensive positions that were somehow both everywhere and nowhere. Explain, Crixtan demanded. The Dominion's approach to warfare is perfect within its own paradigm, the human coordinator continued. You've achieved something remarkable, the complete mastery of conflict as traditionally understood. But mastery within limitations isn't the same as transcendence beyond them. The tactical display expanded again, showing not star maps, but something far more complex. Networks of possibility, branching probabilities, conflict scenarios that existed in theoretical space. The Dominion's conquests appeared as tiny nodes within vast webs of potential warfare that stretched across dimensions they hadn't known existed. Every species we've preserved brought unique insights, but they were all reactive insights, responses to challenges, adaptations to circumstances. The Veltharian military doctrine is different. It's proactive, systematically aggressive, designed to create and control the terms of engagement rather than merely respond to them. Vexaria's voice carried something that might have been admiration. You don't just fight wars, Admiral. You architect them. You understand conflict as a total system rather than just a series of tactical encounters. That systematic approach to warfare is exactly what we need to complete our understanding. The impossible structures began to demonstrate something new, formations that weren't defensive or offensive, but something else entirely. They created spaces where conflict could occur according to rules that shifted moment by moment, battlefield, conditions that adapted to whatever forms of warfare were brought to bear upon them. We've mastered the art of transcending conventional warfare, Vexaria explained, but transcendence without foundation is merely chaos. We can reshape reality to serve military purposes, but we lack the Dominion's systematic approach to implementing that capability across multiple theaters simultaneously. Crixtan found himself studying the human demonstrations with growing fascination despite his earlier anger. The constructs weren't just displaying superior technology, They were illustrating entirely new categories of strategic thinking. Warfare. As environmental modification, conflict as dimensional engineering, victory conditions that existed outside normal space-time. What would integration with your consortium entail? He asked, surprised by his own question. Not integration, Vexaria corrected. Collaboration. The Dominion remains the Dominion. Your military hierarchy, your warrior traditions, your systematic approach to conquest, but enhanced beyond current limitations. New images appeared on the tactical display, Veltharian fleets moving through, space that folded around them, Dominion warriors wielding weapons that fired concepts rather than energy, battle stations that existed in multiple realities simultaneously while maintaining perfect tactical coordination. Your forces would retain their essential nature while gaining access to forms of warfare that transcend physical limitations. Instead of conquering star systems, you could conquer entire probability matrices. Instead of defeating enemies, you could render the concept of opposition itself irrelevant within controlled regions of space-time. Mordak whispered, Admiral, the strategic possibilities. If we could apply Dominion doctrine to warfare unconstrained by conventional physics. The catch, Crixtan said flatly. There's always a catch. The price is simple, Vexaria replied. You must acknowledge that your understanding of warfare, however perfect within its domain, was incomplete. You must accept that there are forms of conflict you never imagined, victories you never conceived, and challenges that your current paradigm cannot address. The human coordinator paused, and her next words carried the weight of inevitability. You must choose to evolve, Admiral. Not because you've been defeated. You haven't been. But because you recognize that evolution is the only path to true supremacy. Around them, 30,000 Dominion vessels waited in the shadow of impossibility, their crews watching their admiral wrestle with a choice that would define not just their future, but the very nature of warfare itself. Admiral Crixtan stood, motionless for 17 standard minutes, his bridge crew maintaining perfect silence as their commander processed the implications of humanity's offer. The Veltharian military mind was built for decisive action, trained to analyze tactical situations and commit to courses of action without hesitation. But this moment existed outside all previous parameters of decision-making. Finally, his war clause extended fully, not in aggression, but in the ancient Veltharian gesture of acknowledgement before superior strategy. Coordinator Vexaria, he said, his voice carrying the formal cadences of military protocol, the Veltharian Dominion accepts your proposal for collaborative evolution. The transformation began immediately. Space around the Third Fleet didn't change so much as become, more than it had been before. The human constructs revealed themselves to be merely the visible portions of vast installations that existed primarily in dimensions the Veltharians were only now beginning to perceive. Reality became layered, each layer containing different rules for how matter, energy, and causality could interact. Welcome to warfare unconstrained, Vexaria said, and her voice now carried harmonics that conveyed meaning through channels beyond mere sound. Your first lesson begins now. The impossible became routine with startling speed. Dominion ships found their hulls adapting to contain atmosphere that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Weapon systems expanded beyond their original parameters, now capable of firing across time as well as space. Navigation displays showed not just position and velocity, but probability matrices and causal relationship maps. Within hours, Veltharian tactical doctrine was being rewritten by minds that had spent millennia perfecting systematic warfare, now enhanced by access to tools that made gods seem primitive. Admiral Crixtan found himself commanding not just 30,000 vessels, but 30,000 vessels each existing across multiple probability states, capable of engaging enemies that might or might not exist depending on strategic requirements. The Key insight, Vexaria explained as Dominion officers learned to perceive battlefield conditions that spanned 11 dimensions, is that warfare was never really about defeating enemies. It was about imposing your interpretation of reality upon areas of contested space-time. The enhanced Veltharian fleet began to demonstrate their new capabilities. A single destroyer, operating under modified physics, engaged and defeated an entire theoretical invasion fleet that existed only as mathematical possibility. Dominion ground forces learned to occupy territory by redefining the conceptual foundations underlying the notion of ownership itself. Admiral Crixtan coordinated strategic operations that spanned not just star systems, but entire branches of causality. His systematic approach to warfare, now unbound by conventional limitations, created campaigns that were works of art as much as military operations. Enemies were defeated not through destruction, but through elegant proofs that their existence was tactically unnecessary. Remarkable, Mordak observed, his consciousness now distributed across 17 parallel processing nodes while maintaining perfect unity of perspective. We've achieved something that transcends victory. We've made conflict itself voluntary. Enhanced Dominion forces began expanding their operations beyond the Sol system, but expansion now meant something entirely different. Instead of conquering territories sequentially, they established spheres of influence that existed in all possible territories simultaneously. Species that might have been invaded were instead offered participation in realities where their greatest aspirations were automatically fulfilled. This is not conquest, Admiral Crixatan realized, his understanding encompassing strategic possibilities that had been literally unthinkable just days before. This is the evolution of conflict into pure creative force. Now you understand, Vexaria replied, her form now visible as something that existed across multiple species simultaneously. Human, Veltharian, and representatives of dozens of other civilizations that had chosen transcendence over tradition. Warfare was always about changing reality to match your will. We've simply removed the limitations that made that process inefficient. The enhanced Veltharian dominion spread across the galaxy not as conquerors, but as architects of possibility itself. Their military doctrine, perfected through 3 millennia of systematic conquest, became the foundation for forms of warfare that transformed conflict from destructive competition into collaborative reality engineering. Species that had once faced the choice between submission and destruction now encountered a third option: participation in forms of existence so fundamentally superior to their previous states that resistance became literally inconceivable. Not because they were forced to submit, but because they were offered the opportunity to become more than they had ever imagined possible. Admiral Crixtan, now commanding fleets that existed across infinite probability states while maintaining perfect tactical coherence, smiled with satisfaction that transcended mere victory. The Veltharian Dominion had achieved its ultimate evolution, from masters of conventional warfare to architects of reality itself. They had discovered that the greatest conquest was not defeating enemies, but making the entire concept of opposition irrelevant through the simple expedient of creating realities where everyone's highest aspirations could be simultaneously fulfilled. The galaxy had become not a battlefield, but a collaborative work of art in which warfare had evolved into pure creative expression, and somewhere in the vast networks of enhanced consciousness that now spanned known space, humanity smiled at having found partners worthy of the infinite game they had been playing alone for far too long.